was heading back to the Expo Centre and I came across one of our church families. So mum, dad and 3 kids, and they'd all been serving there. And they were heading off to, all the rides. And they said, the mum said to me, we're saying to our kids, you serve first and then you go and have fun. And I thought, what a great thing, what a great attitude, what a great situation. And it is, I think that across our church family, that people have just served so well and worked so well together. So thank you to all of you. And there's an opportunity for further service at about 2 o'clock this afternoon as we clean up and pack up and all that exciting stuff. So if you can turn up about 2 and help, that would be fantastic. But this morning we're going to think a little bit from Exodus chapter 1 and chapter 2. If you've got your Bible there, you might like to have open those chapters. Now, I guess one truth about myself is that I'm fairly cheap, and nowhere is this more expressed than when it comes to buy fuel. So I always try to find the cheapest fuel I can get, and if I'm going somewhere, I go on a website called Petrol Spy. I find out where the cheapest fuel is going to be on my route, and I try and buy it there. So you can just imagine the joy that I received when I got an email from Budget Direct, my insurer, another cheap option, and they were offering for a limited time 10 cents a litre of Shell petrol. And in addition to that, you can put your 4 cents from Coles on that. So just to do the maths for you, that's 14 cents a litre of fuel, and that brought great joy to my heart. So I really don't mind where I get fuel from. Often go to Woolies if it's cheaper there. Go next door to Mobil if that's cheaper. Certainly look at Liberty because they're often cheaper. Very rarely go to BP because it's hardly ever cheaper. I can recommend the no-name service station at Sandy Hollow if you're going to Newcastle. I don't necessarily recommend coffee, but I do recommend the fuel because it's cheap. You see, I have no loyalty to any brand of fuel. When it comes to buying fuel, it's all about me. It's all about getting the lowest number on my credit card that I can. You see, I'm a consumer, and I'm quite shameless about that. But, let me say, there is a trend in Western society where when we come to church, often we're not coming as communers to commune with God. We're bringing the attitude that I bring to buying fuel, and we become consumers. And so a lot of people, when they come to church, it's that feeling, it's all about me. It's what can I get? Well, there was a survey done. It was done in the US, and the people were asked, why does church exist? And 89% of them said the church's purpose was to take care of my families and my own spiritual needs. 11% said the purpose of the church is to win the world for Jesus. See, there's quite a different attitude in that, isn't there? For the spirit that we've seen this weekend of people serving at the show, serving others, serving each other, serving our church, is well reflected in that attitude of the church exists to win the world for Jesus. But it's quite a consumer attitude to say, church is there for me. If it suits my needs today, that's fantastic. If it doesn't, I might just search down the road to find one that does. Greg Laurie, and if you've seen the Jesus Revolution, it's the life of Greg Laurie. He has this to say about that survey. He said, these attitudes concern me deeply. In the long run, if we train consumers instead of communers, we end up with customers instead of disciples. And Jesus is not calling us to be customers. He's calling us to join a church family and be disciples. When it comes to the Exodus story, as it unfolds, we find people there who are very much whinging and whining on so many different occasions. They complain about life in Egypt, justifiably so I'm sure. They complain about life in the wilderness. They complain about the manna that they receive. They complain about everything along the way. They complain about Moses' leadership. And in the end, this is where their whinging and whining gets them. I think that attitude means that they don't, when they get to the border of the promised land, they don't have the faith to cross over. Remember, the spies are sent out and they come back, and 10 of them say, there are giants in the land, we can't do it. 2 of them say, we just need faith to step forward. But ultimately the people don't do it. And I believe it all comes from this attitude of whinging and whining, of being consumers and being selfish. Well, the book of Exodus records God's people's journey out of slavery in Egypt and into the promised land. And in many ways, it reflects our own personal journey out of the bondage of sin and into freedom and forgiveness and all that God has in store for us. Well, it really starts before the passage that John read to us. It starts in chapter 1 of Exodus. But chapter 1 of Exodus really makes this link to the end of the book of Genesis. So it's very much a continuation. And so it begins by telling us the family names of the people who are there in Egypt. And in verse 5, it says that there are 70 people, all generated by Jacob's seed. Joseph was already in Egypt, it says. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and the whole generation. But the children of Israel kept on reproducing. They were very prolific, a population explosion in their own right, and the land was filled with them. So Exodus is this continuation from Genesis. The story continues. And in Exodus 1 and verse 6, it says that Joseph and all his generation, that generation had died. But 300 or 400 years later, excuse me, 300 or 400 years later, God is still in a covenant relationship with his people. And it's important to see that there are kind of 2 things happening at this stage. On one hand, the people living in the land are living in slavery. They're making bricks, they're working hard, they have this land of freedom. But God has a covenant relationship with his people. And on another level, he's working for their salvation and their deliverance. This covenant, of course, we go back into Genesis, we discover it starts with Abraham. He calls Abraham to leave his family, leave the place he was living in, and go, God says, to a place that I will show you. And eventually, God says to Abraham, he falls on his face and he says, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. No longer will your name be called Abram, but your name will be called Abraham, for I have made you the father of many nations. And of course, at that time he was childless. But this is a story of a covenant of a man who was going to be the father of many nations, but had no children. And he was over 90, his wife was 90, and God says, you're going to have a family. Does it sound absurd? Well, Abraham thought it was, and Sarah laughed. But there was an angel there, and the angel's response was, is there anything too hard for the Lord? And so, sure enough, Abraham and Sarah do have a child, and Abraham does become the father of many nations. And we get to realise as this story unfolds that God is always at work in the world. We may not see Him. We may not be aware of it. We might be making bricks. We might feel like we're slaves. But God is somewhere in the background at work. Well, God, because of this covenant, is at work in this story. And as it unfolds, we see that a change occurs. So in Exodus 1 verse 8, it says, "Then a new king, he did not know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt." And this Pharaoh, he didn't know about Joseph. He didn't have this sense of goodwill towards God's people. So he made them slaves, he made them work very hard. And it says in verse 14, "In all their hard work, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly." Life was good in Egypt for them at one stage, but now they're being used, they're being exploited in a ruthless fashion. And I think this reminds us that there is always a new Pharaoh coming who doesn't look at the history, who doesn't connect with the past, and things can change and things can become very bad. And I think in Western culture, we're kind of moving into this now. We're moving into a phase where there is a social attitude that doesn't remember the advantage and the heritage of the Christian faith. It doesn't remember that so many of the things that we cherish have come about because of the teaching of Jesus and because there have been disciples that followed him. And of course, if you know Paul Rowe, this is his whole theme at the moment, that there are so many Christians who've created so much positive capital, social capital in our nation. But we forget them. And so Christianity and Christians can be disregarded and pushed aside because we've forgotten the past. That's where God's people find themselves, in this very difficult place of exploitation. But somewhere in the background, God and His unseen hand is at work. It's at work in the birth of this child, Moses. So use your imagination to reflect on this story with me. Can you imagine the anxiety that surrounded Moses' mother as she knew she was pregnant? And she knew that the policy that this Pharaoh had adopted would be one where the baby would be in danger. The policy was, we read in Exodus 2 and verse 2, after Moses was born. So the policy was that the Hebrew children would be killed, the male children would be killed, because they were posing a potential threat in the future. So God is at work to resolve that situation, to bring salvation. But God is not only at work in the world, God invites us to come on board with Him. And in this invitation comes to Moses' mother. And let's get back to Exodus 2 and Exodus chapter 2 and verse 2. It says, "When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him, coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds on the bank of the Nile." This is, of course, the natural love of a mother, but I think beyond that, Moses' mother saw something of God's leading in life to take the baby and to try and save his life in this way. She knew in her heart that God had a plan. And I think all of us need to think about, if we have children, do we see our children as a gift from God, or do we see our children as us having a relationship of responsibility to teach them about God and to prepare them that they may well be God's servants they may be someone who God is going to use in an amazing way as he used Moses. And we, if we're parents, are the custodians of that journey for our children. And I think Moses' mother had something of that attitude and that vision for her child. But there is here, I think, more than a mother's natural love. Moses' mother hid him for 3 months. She bravely opposed this edict of children being killed. And in Hebrews 11 it says the parents of Moses are there with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Gideon, David and Samuel as the heroes of our faith. It says in Hebrews 11:23, by faith Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw that he was no ordinary child and that they were not afraid of the king's edict. So when she could hide him no longer, she put him in this little basket and put him in the river. And when she did that, she was completely relying on God. And she did everything that she could do, but she still needed God's hand and God's intervention. And it tells us that she stood back and waited. And there was nothing more difficult to do, I think, than in a situation like that, to wait and to be passive and to not do anything. So around this little basket, that frail basket, half lost among the reeds, is God's purpose waiting there. You see, God is always at work in the world around us, and he invites us to join him in his work. And this should convince us that no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the pharaohs may rise up against us, no matter how many forces Satan might throw against us, God's will will finally be accomplished, as it was in this story. Maybe not today, maybe not even this year, but his will and his purpose are going to prevail. And as, again, we look at our world, we see things perhaps that concern us or disturb us. We might see that politically, we might see that socially. As people always say, well, where is the world going? What's becoming of this place? What's going to happen in the next generation? All those concerns, you can place them in God's hands. Because ultimately, it is God who will prevail in all these things. Because God is always at work in the world around us, and he invites us to join him. Well, of course, as you know in the story, Pharaoh's daughter comes along and finds him. Well, one commentator, whose name is Harrison, believes that this was the time of Ramses II. And of course, there's a lot of debate about all of that. But he has an interesting observation that if it was Ramses II, Ramses, this daughter, is probably the offspring of one of his concubines, because he had 60 daughters. Which is kind of interesting because it makes it slightly different, at least to my Sunday school image of what may or may not have happened. But it does mean that Moses was still in this fold of the royal fold and the royal privilege, even though he didn't hold an office. In Acts 7 and verse 21 it says, talking of Moses, then he was placed outside. Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. It's interesting, John Maxwell says that leadership is about influence. So here's Moses. He's educated in that royal sense, but he doesn't have an office and he doesn't really have an influence. But he has this urge, I think, this inner compulsion to lead. We see that as he seeks to lead his own people. We see that as he kind of spontaneously takes action and is willing to step up and do things. As the story unfolds, he's a leader. But in those early days, he was not a leader without God transforming his life. And God takes about 40 years to transform Moses into the leader that he needs to be to do this task. You see, this is God's hand at work in the background, and it's wonderful, and it's moving to a great conclusion. But for some people, it meant they were slaves, they were harshly treated, they were making bricks every day for that 40 years. And I think this that realisation brings a new dimension to this story. Because we know, we want to own the fact that God is at work in this world. And we know that when God is at work in this world, he invites us to come in and join him in what he's doing. But sometimes we are left making bricks. We're left in those hard circumstances. Victory is coming, but it may not come in the short term. And in all that period of waiting, there we might be making bricks. I don't know if this story encourages you or discourages you, because that's a tough call for those individual slaves making bricks year after year after year after year. But it's encouraging, isn't it? That there in the background, unseen and unperceived, is the hand of God. He's chosen a leader already. He's preparing that leader, and slowly but surely that leader is being thrust forward into an arena where God's people are going to be saved. When we look at the things that we don't like in our society and our world, we can become particularly downhearted. But know this, God is at work in our world. A victory is coming, as it came for these people. But in the meantime, he calls us to be patient and faithful and keep making the bricks that are part of our life to be made. To keep looking to him in faith and to persevere and endure as we wait for that day of victory to come. And I think it's a call for us to wait with a sense of patience and confidence. Let me pray patience and confidence in your life. Father, just like these people who were alive in Moses' day, we often have frustration and difficulty with our circumstances. I pray, Father, that you give us a great vision of your hand at work, a great confidence that you are ultimately going to be victorious in this world, that you will shape history as you determined, and you will take us to a place of victory in Jesus, as you've also ordained. Help us, Father, as we reflect on the communion table and the cross and all that Jesus has done for us in the past. Help us to be confident of all that he will do to us, for us in the future as he returns. In his victorious name we pray.